Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, Opie recounts his experience of taking in a grieving friend who had lost her family to the pandemic. As they lived together, their relationship grew into love and eventually marriage. However, he discovered his wife's infidelity with a neighbor, leading to a heartbreaking divorce. Despite her pleas, he chose to end the relationship and focus on healing from the betrayal. Now let's get into the story. My wife and I fell apart after 2 years of marriage. My wife and I started dating around 2020 after the coronavirus struck the world. She had lost her family of 3 to the virus, and as her closest family friend, I had no other option than to take her in. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. One was my bedroom, and the other was my office because I was already working remotely for a top freelancing platform, whose name I would be withholding, and I had to move my office to my bedroom so she could sleep in the second room. When she moved in, she was grieving, always moody, and almost depressed, and I took up the responsibility of caring for her all through her stay with me. At that time, I was earning very well, so I didn't need her to contribute to anything, not even groceries. She barely ate and was not herself for the first few months. 7 months later, she snapped out of her mourning state and became active again. Then she started looking for a job. The main reason she wanted a job was to pay me back for all the things I had done for her, but when I found out, I stopped her from working and suggested that she learn a high-demand skill so she could register on the same platform I worked at and also earn remotely. She agreed and I paid for an expensive course for her, and she mastered the skill. In the following months, she registered on the platform and began to get her own clients, and that was how we became 2 remote workers living together. When my wife moved in with me after she lost her parents, I had just broken up from a toxic relationship, and the last thing I wanted was a relationship. But having my wife in the house all the time helped me in some way and caused me to reevaluate the important things in life. So in the process of her living with me, I fell in love with her even without knowing. With her becoming active again, our relationship grew stronger and we even became closer. I literally became her only friend and family, and slowly, we started doing the things only couples did. We went on vacations together because we were both financially stable, got each other gifts, visited the places we always wanted to, and we even took more advanced courses to help us in our skills. After living together for 2 years, the neighbors and those who stayed or worked around our house knew we were together, even though we were not together. Even when I had not asked her out yet, I knew she loved me, but I was afraid she would turn me down because she kept saying she was tired of people coming into her life and leaving her when she needed them the most. So I kept procrastinating. Eventually, I asked her out on her 27th birthday. We weren't doing anything that year. We only went to have a fancy dinner, and while we were in the restaurant, I paid the waiter to bring in a cake I had delivered some hours before we went there. And instead of having happy birthday, it had "Will you be my girlfriend?" And she said yes in excitement. Initially, I intended to propose to her, but I wanted to ask her out first. For months later, after she said yes to me, I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. My parents already knew her because her late family and my family were friends, and they were delighted when they found out we were getting married. We made the wedding plans and had a small wedding, then moved into a bigger apartment with enough space for our respective workspace. When we moved into this new apartment, my wife was jovial and always in high spirits with the neighbors. The neighbors, too, were receptive and welcoming, unlike my former neighbors, who were always busy and barely had time to speak or talk with us for more than 5 minutes. When this happened, I was delighted because she had a different happiness spending time with the neighbors, especially since she lost her family and barely interacted with others except my family and me. She even started cooking and sharing food with the neighbors and their kids, and it contributed to their closeness. Being remote workers allowed us to create our own work timetable, and whenever she was done working, she would go grocery shopping and come back home to cook. She claimed that cooking helped her clear her head, and sharing food with other people reminded her of her family reunions and much more. I understood her point of view, so I didn't argue with her or try to stop her, even when some of the neighbors started taking advantage of her kind gesture. Aside from the food, some neighbors began to ask for financial assistance, which we helped whenever we could. And there was this 80-year-old man who asked if she could help him cook on some evenings and clean his house too, since he had no family living with him. So when my wife told me about it, I reluctantly agreed, and she'd go over to his house twice or thrice a week to cook and clean. About a month after she started cooking and cleaning for him, I noticed she went there almost every evening except on weekends. This was more often than their initial agreement, but I thought everything was okay. Then, one day, I was in my apartment watching television when I heard a knock on the door. I knew it was unlike my wife to knock when she had her keys, so I opened the door and realized it was our neighbor she cooked for. When I saw him, I thought he had come to thank me and my wife for her help, but he looked somewhat disturbed. When he sat and I asked him if everything was okay, he first said, "Wife stopped coming over to my house because she is having an affair with my renter." Then he stopped and looked at me. I was shocked to hear that and didn't know what to say. I asked him if he was telling the truth, and he admitted that he had no reason to lie. When we were having this discussion in my apartment, my wife had gone grocery shopping to cooking the next day, so she wasn't at home. I didn't want to believe the old man, but as he said, he had no reason to lie, and it made no sense for him to lie against my wife. So in the end, I asked him if he could show me something to prove that he was telling the truth, and he promised to make a video and send it to me when next she came over, which would be her last time visiting his house. That evening, when my wife came back, I didn't mention anything to her. I just acted like everything was fine, and I didn't say that the old man came over when she was away. The next evening, she told me she was going there as usual, and I pretended to not pay any attention and acted like I was engrossed with my work. About 15 minutes after she left, the old man sent me a video of my wife in his renter's room, and they were making out in the living room, thinking he was asleep in his room. When I saw the video, I was broken. I knew the man she was kissing and could not believe she had done that to me. I thanked him and told him I'd be locking her out of the house, and he promised to do the same because his renter was late on rent payment and he had enough of him. Later that evening, when my wife came home and could not access the house, she started to yell and hit the door, but I sent her the same video, and she began to beg me from outside. She asked me to open the door to discuss things, but I was done with her. She betrayed me and did not care about my feelings. On the other end, her lover was kicked out by the old man, and they were both homeless that evening. I refused to let her in that night, and after a few days, she returned to meet her stuff packed at one corner of the house, but she refused to leave. I called the police because she was disturbing my peace and the neighbor's peace, and she was taken away. About 2 months later, I divorced her, and she cried bitterly. She tried to emotionally blackmail me into staying with her, but I had enough of her nonsense. She said something about me being the only person she had left in the world, but I reminded her she had her lover now, and I cut all ties with her. It turned out that her lover was an illegal immigrant, and he fled the country when I threatened to arrest him on the day my wife came to pick up her things. So in the end, he left her, and she had no one else to turn to. It's been a couple of months, and I still feel stupid for being played like that, but I'm way better now, and I don't think I'll be ready to be in a relationship anytime soon. Today's second story. In this story, Opie discovers his wife, a doctor, is cheating with a patient. Despite a prenup, she loses everything in their divorce, including her medical license and reputation. He exposes the affair to the other man's wife, leading to more fallout. He reflects on the betrayal and its impact on their lives and concludes he's not to blame for her actions. Now let's get into the story. My wife, 47 female, was a doctor. I, 41 male, worked full-time as a real estate agent. My wife and I were well-known and respected. We hosted parties once a month. Sometimes it was a cookout. Sometimes it was a formal event. We usually invited our coworkers, friends, and friends of friends. I thought about how devastating it would be if my wife and I ever split. We signed a prenup that stated in the event of a divorce, she would keep the house and the money in our joint account would be split between us. This would be null and void if either of us had an affair, though. I couldn't imagine living without my wife. Our marriage was so sweet. My wife was so honorable and loving towards me. I know I treated her in kind. We grew extremely close over 14 years of marriage. At times it felt like I was only half a person. I needed her. At one of our parties on a Friday night, my wife introduced me to a man I'd never seen before. She said he was new to the office and needed to make some friends. The three of us talked for a while before my wife suggested I take him to the golf course that Sunday. I flinched. I didn't feel like it. I'd hardly gotten to know him, but it would have been awkward for me to say no. Later that night, after all the guests were gone, I asked her why she wanted me to hang out with this guy so much. She played it off like she didn't really want me to. She just thought it was a nice suggestion, so she made me feel like it was my decision to invite him. While golfing, he was very amused the entire time. He made subtle jokes about my wife and how he'd be a member of the golf course soon. I asked him what he did for a living because the membership was expensive, and he said he was planning to live off the inheritance from his grandfather. Something about this guy just didn't seem right. I felt like he was trying to pass off lies as facts. The last thing to put me off was when he said my wife was like his pet bunny. He could never hurt her and just wanted to take care of her. This was unsettling. I told him my wife was no one's bunny but my own, and I'd be the one taking care of her. He just snickered. The next day, my wife and I were back to the grind. I was at work when I received a message from my wife's receptionist. She knew my wife's schedule and had something to tell me. It was a long message. She didn't feel like it was her place to get involved, but eventually, she had for 3 months, she noticed one particular patient scheduling a lot of appointments with my wife. He would always request the time slot when my wife was supposed to take her lunch break. Each time he requested this, my wife said she could squeeze him in. She didn't know if anything was going on between them, but suggested I come by the office to make sure. I agreed, thanked her, and asked when he was scheduled to see her next. She said he was with her right now, but they weren't in the exam room. They were in my wife's locked office. Suddenly, the situation seemed urgent. I grabbed the spare key to my wife's office and went. When I got there, it had been 20 minutes since she locked the door. Co-workers followed close behind me, whispering. I heard someone say it was his 5th appointment with her this month. The door opened, and we all saw them lying nude on a pull-out couch in front of my wife's desk. AP was the same man I played golf with. Clothes were everywhere, so they frantically jumped up and started grabbing them. They refused to dress in front of everyone, so they pushed through the crowd of psyched onlookers to get to the bathroom. I followed my wife into the women's room and yelled in disbelief. I asked her to explain herself, but she only asked me what I was doing there. Reality hadn't sunk in yet. I told her that I was there because all her co-workers suspected her of sleeping with her patient, and apparently it was true. Hearing me say this hit her like a ton of bricks. I saw her face fall right before she started crying her eyes out. I asked why she did this, but she wouldn't answer, either because she was crying too hard or because there was no reason why. Everyone knew she was cheating on me. Her carelessness led to me finding the truth, and now there was no going back. She sobbed on the floor, shaking her head. She tried to reach up to me, like she wanted me to come closer. I loved her so much, but knowing why you now made me angry. She didn't have enough respect for me or her profession to resist this average, random man, probably because she expected to get away with it. She had the nerve to invite him to our party, lied to me about how she knew him, and convinced me to spend time with him. Now it was clear she was going to lose her license to practice because she slept with him. I was angry enough to leave her there on the floor. AP had left, but one of the nurses told me his name. I found his profile and the link to his wife's name. I sent her a long message, along with names of people who could back up what I was saying. Her husband was having an affair with his doctor. At the court hearings for our divorce, my wife was even more humiliated. She had taken out all the money in our savings account, even though the prenup stated otherwise. Besides that, the prenup was no longer valid because my wife committed adultery. She was ordered to return the savings to me and pay alimony payments. She could no longer practice as a doctor and was ordered to move out. And all her previous friends and co-workers turned against her. AP's ex harassed her online, commanding one specific insult on all her pictures and calling her a homewrecker. She was a respected doctor who slept with her patients. I don't know what she was thinking. I wondered why this guy, and why I wasn't good enough for her. Enough time has passed that I stopped asking myself those questions because there's nothing to blame myself for. I did what I could.